Thank you for your presentation. And my name is Giorgio. This is Verity and Ben. And our presentation, of course, aligning digitalization with environmental sustainability objectives. So a quick overview. We're first going to go over the main points in the UNCTAD 2024 Digital Economy Report summary. And then we're going to look at three extensions which we thought were relevant. So the first one is going to be digital twin, as presented by Ben. The second is going to be artificial intelligence and unequal ecological exchange. And the third one will be current and alternative strategies for transformation. So the chapter 2 of the report stresses digitalization's impact on the material footprint. What is the material footprint? It is the total amount of raw materials extracted to meet final consumption demand. Why do we care? Well, I think there was a nice stat in the report because it contributes to 60% of greenhouse gas emissions. And essentially, the first fact that the report finds is that digitalization is very material intensive. And typically, the more efficient a digital product is, the more raw materials it requires for its use. And because of this, increased digitalization, driven by demand for internet traffic, computing power, hardware, and data infrastructure, contribute to an increased material footprint. And not only that, but since the developed economies are very large net importers of materials used in digital products, increased digitalization also contributes not only to the total size of the material footprint, but also its unequal distribution between countries.
Hello everyone. So with respect to the UNCTAD report and with the contributions from the speaker, I would like to highlight this particular chapter from the UNCTAD report, which talks about digitalization related waste and circular economy. The chapter talks about multiple important information, which includes what is the definition of digitalization related waste, the illegal trade of digitalization related waste, the drivers of these wastes like planned obsolescence and so on. But I would like to first highlight the definition of digitalization-related waste itself. As the speaker has mentioned, digitalization-related waste has this unique characteristic that it contains hazardous materials which needs to be treated carefully. At the same time, it also contains valuable parts which needs to be recovered in a better way so that we could reuse it. Having said that, the report classifies e-waste into different categories. And within this categories, two categories are considered to be digitalization-related waste. For example, from the electronic equipments I've showed below, only a mobile phone and a laptop could be considered as a digitalization-related waste. And only these are accounted in the particular report to be considered as a digitalization-related waste among the e-wastes. There are also a gray area in this aspect. For example, a refrigerator that is connected to an internet can be considered as a digital good as well, also at the same time as an electronic good. And there are also extreme cases like a satellite, which is outside the Earth's orbit, or like a data center which uses sophisticated products, can also be considered to be a digital good. So having said that, the definition of digitalization-related waste itself is a moving target, and it needs to be accounted carefully. And there's also an important fact that the developed countries uses 15 times more digitalization-related waste or produces more digitalization-related waste than developing countries. Another aspect I would like to highlight is the environmental, health, and social impacts of these wastes, because most of these wastes are treated in developing countries in a highly informal sector with huge gender discrimination and child labor. There's this important fact in the report that almost 3 million to 13 million women are in one way or the other exposed towards the electronic waste toxicity. At the same time, about 18 million children are employed in one or the other manner of waste-related industries. Why? Because children have smaller hands, which helps them to dismantle the products within the electronic devices in an easier manner. Thus, child labor is very high in this particular industry. And it is also reported that women, usually when it comes to high labor, low paying industries, are always considered at the bottom of the hierarchy. And so is the case with this particular waste management industry.
So the next chapter focuses on the environmental impacts of the use phase of digitalization, and specifically it focuses on data centers. Data centers use heaps and heaps and heaps of energy. Like there's a stat in the report where they say data centers in 2022 consumed equivalent energy to like the entire of Mexico or the UK, so like a lot, about like 1 to 1.5% of global energy use. And then at the same time as data centers are using like an awful lot of energy, there's also associated greenhouse gas emissions, but also like so much water use. And then there are trade-offs within this as well. Like for example, if you have like a data center in a country with like a lot of like a really hot country and lots of solar energy, you also have to then use like way more water. So there are like trade-offs between like maximizing or like minimizing energy and water use. And then there's also this importance of shifting to renewables without crowding out other users of energy, and the importance of working with local governments to do that. And then another thing that I just wanted to highlight as well is that a lot of kind of focus in this space of data centers has been on energy efficiency, but there's a projection that like limits in that could be reached by 2040. And then if you're constantly upgrading all of this hardware all of the time to become like more and more energy efficient, there's like so much hardware waste as a result of that. You just went through this, so I won't go over this in like a lot of detail. There's a lot of stuff in this report. And the main kind of pillar is about like thinking about digitalization, environmental sustainability, and inclusive development as integrated, and then also thinking across the whole life cycle about, like as we like mentioned previously, like the greenhouse gas emissions, energy, and water all being interrelated, considering all stakeholders, which also includes civil society and different levels of governance, thinking about like data gaps and how we can address those, and then also this common but differentiated responsibilities approach.
So having said that, we wanted to bring some spin-offs from the paper, some interesting ideas from whatever we study. And one of the aspects that we brought were digital twin. So with the introduction of Industry 4.0, with automation, robotics, and artificial intelligence, it is a growing aspect. So for the people who do not know what digital twin is, it's basically creating a digital replica of a physical product and feeding them with real-time data, and because of which you can sort of almost predict and simulate this particular model. It's heavily used in the industries of automobiles and city planning, for example, in the cities of Singapore, and even in the automobile industries. And it is also discussed in the paper that the concept called digital passport, which is basically trying to understand where this particular product originated, where all it went through, so that by the time it reached the end cycle of the production or the end cycle of the life cycle, the recycler sort of gets a clear idea about how to dismantle or reuse this product. And here comes the introduction or the usage of digital twin. All right, we have already gotten the next slide. This is a paper by Wang and Wang in 2019, which talks about how digital twins can reduce e-waste. And the basic gist of the paper, if I want to put it in few words, is that recyclers has a big problem, or the biggest struggle that they face is that once they receive the product, they do not know how to dismantle it, what are the important or valuable products that we could extract from it, and so on. And oftentimes the valuable products get destroyed in this process. Here comes the introduction of digital twin, where it sorts of moves through different categories, right from the inception of the product or the design of the product. Every data is being registered into the process, and even the end user's usage, the location of the product, the duration of the product or the life of the product, and so on. So by the time it reaches the last stage, which is the recycler, he or she might have a better idea about to take better decisions on whether to reuse it, repair it, or remanufacture it. And this is something that is also discussed in the paper. Among the different hierarchy of recycling, this can be at the top of the table. Having said that, ISO has also created a mandate on how to structure the data within this data twin, so that once it reaches the recycler, they sort of get a very standardized data on this aspect. Having said that, there's also a caveat that comes with this. As you all know, Professor David has also written a nice paper on this, on how the data is being controlled by few big firms, especially the cloud data, like Amazon and Alphabet. So it also creates a problem that this particular data or the control is under the hands of few big players, even at the end of the day.
So we'll move on to the next topic. We wanted to focus on this concept of unequal ecological exchange, which was mentioned in the paper. But I think we wanted to bring a more theoretical and empirical aspect to it. So, if to the people who don't know, the concept of unequal exchange kind of in the modern times originates from Prebish's 1950 paper, which essentially says that in international trade you have economic value transfers through distorted price mechanisms. The concept of unequal ecological exchange is more recent, and it essentially focuses on the fact that alongside these economic value asymmetries, there's also asymmetric transfer of material and physical resources. So methodologically, I think it's nice to point out recent work using environmentally extended multi-regional input-output tables, which use this methodology to calculate the physical quantity of raw materials embodied in trade. So quickly, how does this work? You have a standard domestic input-output table, you introduce the foreign matrix, and you introduce the satellite matrix so that you can do these calculations. And essentially, various papers have done this, and they find that advanced economies are net appropriators of raw materials. And this essentially enlarges their material footprint through trade. So one example is the graph at the top from Hickel's 2022 paper. Here we have the exchange of raw material equivalents in terms of gigatons. So here is from the perspective of countries categorized as Global South. We see the light gray bars at the top. In 2015, it's about 3 gigatons embodied into the imports of the Global South, and 15 gigatons embodied in the exports of the Global South. And to interpret this, we can kind of see the ratio is about 5 to 1, which means that for every 1 unit of raw material equivalents that the Global South needs to import from the Global North, the Global South needs to export 5 units to pay for these to pay for this 1 unit. So here we have physical unequal exchange. And this inequality is worsened by the fact that you also have developing countries who are kind of stuck in these low value added stages of the value chain. So if you imagine the smile curve, they're at the low value added stages. And one example is Dorninger's 2021 paper, the second graph, which shows does a monetary evaluation of this embodied raw material equivalents and find that the trade in value added per raw material equivalent is much higher in the high-income countries, the purple line, than the low-income countries, the green line. So we also have this monetary unequal exchange in resources. So our conjecture is that digitalization demand is concentrated in developed countries, and this reproduces uneven patterns of specialization and trade. And I think one good case study that we wanted to explore is artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is a driver of the next phase of digitalization. And specifically, there are 2 reasons, 2 facts why we think AI contributes to unequal ecological exchange. The first, AI growth is dependent on very material-intensive inputs. The first is data centers, data center infrastructure. If we see these projections from McKinsey, we see that the estimated global data center capacity will be very driven by generative AI workload by 2030. And also we have semiconductor and chips demand, which is also very material intensive and which is a byproduct of data center demand. And this is also very material intensive in terms of critical minerals and metals. The second fact is that demand for AI inputs is heavily concentrated in developed economies. So for 2 facts, for example, one from the report, 80% of data centers are currently located in developed countries. And secondly, forecasting this in the future, for example, the US has planned 10 times more in investment in data center than China. So with these 2 facts, I think we can conclude that skewed AI growth in the developed economies will lead to a furthering of intensifying of unequal ecological exchange, with developed countries expanding the material footprint by using essentially being net consumers of AI-related materials.
Thanks. So this next part is just looking at strategies that can kind of go like concurrent to the report. Yeah, like last time I checked, I'm pretty sure the UN wasn't an anti-capitalist institution. So obviously there are barriers there, and a lot of what you've already talked about today has considered things like overconsumption and circularity, etc. But there are within this contradictions of like the growth paradigm and the impossibility of absolute decoupling of growth and emissions. And then at the same time of this report kind of not going far enough in this sense, is the political climate of shifting responsibilities, where environmental issues and economic development are increasingly less priorities as geopolitical tensions and fascism rise. So how feasible is achieving the necessary change at the necessary scale? And I guess I'm just pointing out here that policy, legislation, and institutional changes are one part of the transformation. And while we campaign for changes in this space, there are like grassroots movements that are also providing alternatives in the here and now. And then this like little traffic light system I have up here is just kind of like some Gramsci and Eric Olin Wright and those kind of people, just to say like there's kind of like a role that we don't give up on the state as civil society, that there's importance of political demand and accountability, and that the state can be a source of support for these grassroots movements. And then alongside that we have these grassroots initiatives and what they're doing and how they're kind of like decolonizing the imaginary and what's possible and experimenting with alternatives. And then while they are kind of this hopeful possibility, they are a little bit niche, and there's also an importance of resisting capitalist and state co-optation or like outsourcing of responsibility into these groups. And one example of this is the digital commons. There's this nice paper actually by some people in Paris as well, by Schulz et al., and they give this definition of the digital commons, and they say digital commons are digital resources that contributors co-produce by establishing their own governance rules. There are different origins within this movement which are also kind of connected to their emphasis on the ecological side, where the like more liberal approach, which was kind of like earlier digital commons, but still present today, is this approach of digital commons coming to being this like space of abundance without ecological considerations. And then the more like Marxist and kind of like activist approach that's like coming up more now is this kind of approach of digital sobriety, which you also mentioned previously, this kind of like reducing the amount of technology we use. And then also they talk about how we can use the digital commons as kind of like this anti-capitalist mode of production and way of pushing forward for something new. Yeah, and this report talks about like 3 different examples in France. It's quite cool. I can like send it later. I won't go into it too much in depth. But yeah, they kind of talk about 3 different ways that the digital commons could contribute to an ecological transition. One of these is like a free software type movement, and then there's like a platform co-op that's engaged in the sharing economy, and then also distributed manufacturing based on open hardware, and this enabling like more local circular production. Yeah, this report then also highlights like 3 major challenges, and like one of these is that even though they're doing their best to sort of like shift the power away from big tech, they also rely on big tech, for example, like using an Apple laptop to do the work that you do. And then this more like horizontal approach or much more local approach, kind of like making it difficult to scale, and then also like a negligible political support for these movements as of yet. Yeah, and so the report kind of also closes with a similar kind of like traffic light. They use Eric Olin Wright, the institutional and symbiotic strategies, to talk about how these movements can continue to push for what they're doing, and also resist co-optation and make demands of the state for what they could do more. Yeah, but that's the end of our presentation. We've just got like 3 questions for you, kind of related to each of our 3 extensions that we offer. So the first one is, what do you think is the scope of digital twin in reducing digitalization related waste? And if you had any like first-hand experience or case studies in this area. And then the second question is AI a risk for environmental sustainability and global inequalities? And then the third question is, like in this report, the concentration and power of a few key players is discussed, as well as their regulation. But complementing this, how could in future UNCTAD work to enable and protect digital commons that are challenging this power?
Okay, you leave the questions there because I didn't know them. Okay, thank you very much for the comments. I think they were a very nice summary. You got very well the messages, and also a kind of the things you stress. For me, it was complementary to what I did. For example, on the case of the definitions of waste, I have to tell you to confess that this was one of the most complicated things to work on, because really, I mean, focusing on what was the digitalization part is complicated because of the way it is defined, but not only that, we work with our colleagues that are working with the electronic or e-waste in UNCTAD on the statistics side and in UNEP on the Basel Convention, and even between them, they wanted to stress different things. So in the end, I did a combination of what they were telling me in a way that I didn't bother them too much. So I mean, I went back and forth to really, but it was really very complicated to get to what really was the thing to look at. It was interesting that you did a summary on the use phase, because we had agreed that we were only looking at the chapter on production, on the waste side, and also the last one on the policy, but it was also a very good summary. And just to say in that case that what is also very important is that most of the companies focus only on the emission side, and it's very important also the water. And for developing countries, it is really very important, and it is becoming more and more important and related to the last part that we were talking about, the link of AI and unequal ecological exchange, because there are more and more big tech companies building data centers in developing countries, and the resistance, and they are building in water stress areas, which is crazy, and the resistance is increasing. And I have to say, even I come from a region in Spain, in Aragon, where really the government is putting the red carpet for data centers to come there. Like he has said, the president has said, we want to be the Virginia of Europe. But even in the United States, there are already reactions because the communities, the population are starting to get more aware about the problems with this. So it is really, so in order to go to your questions, I have to confess that we haven't worked on the digital twins part. I found it a very good complement to the presentation. I think it can be an option to do that, but on any technology, from the perspective that we look at it, even digital twin or new progress or AI, it is important to make the questions of what for and for whom. In this case, if the digital twin is to kind of track, as you mentioned, it is very important because really we got this thing of interviews with different stakeholders saying a recycle who doesn't know how the electronic was produced, they don't know how to deal with how to dismantle, how to get the material. So it is very important to use the tools, but in a very focused target manner. And I would say it's the same with AI. We should think, because AI has an impact in many aspects, not only environmental, we should think for what and for whom. If I am using AI for something that it is not really, I could do it easily in a way that, and this is to mean that some element is going to be much richer and richer, I'm not sure if, so we need to rethink what the tools are used for. So again, I mean, I'm still, I don't know what is behind, but probably it's just. I'm not so good because the paradox in my life is that I know about the impact of digitalization on development, but not so much about IT. I always need the help of young people. So again, I mean, I would need to go further into digital twins, but I don't have anything against, as long as it is targeted to good purposes. Is the issue with technologies, digital technologies. They can be used for good or for bad. As long as you use in a good context, that is okay. So I would say that they are a good tool. But I don't have experience or case studies on that. I have to be very honest on digital twins. But what I have in terms of twin is that I mentioned to you the question of the low carbon transition and the digital transition. The European Union has talked a lot about the twin transition. We are against this term because the twin transition has been mostly in terms of priorities of transition, or for us there are not two transitions. The world is in transition and there are different forces that are leading this transition. So we have digital technologies changing the situation. We have the need to fight climate change. We need to change to transition in terms of energy, but we are transitioning in many aspects. So on the concept of twin transition, we would say that it is a concept to avoid. And also, in a way, it may give some kind of priorities, and we don't think that there is a priority in that sense. I mean, what is important is to really move to the right direction of sustainability, of development, this kind of thing. So clearly, the question is yes and yes. I mean, we have in the report, and not only that, is that, as I mentioned, the report was done with data and information and research that was much earlier than the boom on artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence, we are seeing now, there are more and more studies confirming the environmental impact, in terms of electricity. We are moving, as I mentioned, back to more fossil fuels, to nuclear energy. There are impacts on water. There are local impacts. For example, in communities where the data centers are, there is an impact on very much related to noise and these kind of things. So really, they are a question of environmental sustainability. And also in terms of inequality, we are seeing who is developing the models. Mainly the big tech. These are the companies that had most of the access or are privileged because of the platforms that the models that they have, they get most of the data, and they are able to train the artificial intelligence models, and they are benefiting from the artificial intelligence, the commercialization, and we can see. It is true that there are some alternatives we have seen that may be more efficient, like DeepSeek in China, but the concentration of resources or of market power is very evident, and this is very dangerous in terms of inequality. And then, well, I have said it is very related. Inequality, I mean, if all the power is concentrated in a number of hands, it is a clear impact for inequality. And in this case, particularly for developing countries, it is they don't have the capacities, they don't have the money, the money or the human resources. Also, what we see is that most of the talent goes to these big companies because they are able to pay much more salaries. So in the end, we also have a problem because the governments don't have the institutional capacity to govern these new technologies. So really, I would say that both are related, 2 and 3, the first part. The second part, from the work, I would say that digital commons is one part of the solution, would be one part of the solution. There are a number of things to do. In terms of global data governance, there is already one group that created the Global Digital Compact, that I was there intervening also yesterday. There are issues to do in terms of cooperation, in terms of competition policies, but the problem on that is that competition policy is mostly national, or only national, and it is very difficult for only one country to really govern these big tech, so powerful companies. There is also the possibility of taxation that is also discussed, being advanced at the OECD level. And the digital commons, as I'm saying, is a bit more specific thing. And there, my impression, and from what I'm doing, because I'm working now on digital public infrastructure issues and digital public goods, is that I think there is a need to understand all this better. You know, I don't think there is totally, because what we have in this digital environment, digital context, is that we have new economic dynamics. Sometimes the old conventional economics work, the understanding, but sometimes it doesn't. And we really need to understand the dynamics to do. So a number of people are working on that, and I think they are options, ways to go for digital commons. But again, not everything can be a digital commons. So, and I think it's very good that you have proposed, I wouldn't say concurrent, I would say alternatives. Maybe it's a more positive thing, because always in terms of messaging, it is good, for example, what I say about degrowth is that a negative word can never be really taken, a negative message. So degrowth, I would be sympathetic with the logic behind, but there is a need to find a word that is more appealing. And in the sense, when you say concurrent, it may be more appealing to say alternatives. So I think with that.
Hi, I'm Jonas from Switzerland, and I got a question on the feasibility of the circular economy in a capitalist society or economy. And because I'm questioning whether, like, I mean, you've presented a lot of also policy measures and so on, such as like we need to ban planned obsolescence and so on. And I was wondering, like, how your view on that is, because I would argue, I mean, it's a very old story, right? And like, I mean, we have already like this old story of the light bulb that could last forever, and then everyone was laughing in the industry because then you no longer make profits. And I would argue it's somewhat similar in the tech industry. Like, if you actually have, like, if you would ban obsolescence or ban planned obsolescence, and you have gadgets that would last for 1 or 2 decades, I think that's very technically feasible. Then you no longer have profits. Like then like the whole business model of them breaks away, and right. So, yeah, I mean that's basically my question. Is like, what is your opinion on that? Is if you implement all these all these policies, are we still, or can we actually do that in a capitalist society? Is there a way to make profits in the tech industry when you no longer have all these things? I mean, you also said like that there are new business opportunities, and then like listed, for example, repairing it and so on. I would argue maybe yes, but I mean, in comparison what they make right now, that's negligible, right? So yeah.
I'm Daniela from Colombia, and I wonder about the role of patents and intellectual property rights, because you mentioned there how developed countries should have a role in supporting developing. However, for most of the technologies, there are a lot of barriers in terms of access to both of these, to access to technologies and infrastructure because of patents and intellectual property rights. So how do you see it fitting the sustainable objectives?
Hello, thank you for the presentation. So I was wondering, sorry, I'm from Brazil. My question is mostly on the policy recommendations and on firms specifically. I I felt like one of the things that is not much debated is the responsibility of firms on recycling. And in the case of Brazil, like for example, we have three main name brands that are responsible for 60% of the market of smartphones, for instance. And then I wonder why we don't push for firms being responsible from the get-go for recycling. What are the difficulties on imposing that on firms? And yeah, because my logic is that would make firms internalize lots of the issues, like, I don't know, maybe making things more, but would internalize some of the issues. And yeah, that's my question.
Thanks. I give you the floor for a few answers.
Yeah, I hope I understood the questions, because with the microphone, I hope you understood me before well, because sometimes there is a distortion and it's not so easy to understand. But on the question that you mentioned of profits, I would say that this is part of the point of where we need to rethink all our thinking. I mean, it sounds a kind of repetitive, but in the sense that we need to think that in a global way, we have the economy that is part of the society, and that society is part of nature, of the environment. So we have to think in this global way. In terms of technological progress, normally the process has been, okay, the one who was doing innovation or invention was thinking in progressing in technological processes, and then we can talk about what is technologically feasible. But that something is technologically feasible, it doesn't mean that it can be commercialized, because it has to be profitable. But then most of our discussion was going only on these two lines. But then we have to think also on what is socially acceptable and doesn't damage the environment, or in the end, even if it contributes to sustainability. So the one who is doing the technological analysis or the technological progress, the inventor or the innovator, should also already be thinking in not only in profits, but also in the benefits for the society and for the environment. And in that sense, that implies that it is not only profits that is defining what we do. So that's the point, that if we stop at only thinking what is profitable from the commercial of the economic point of view, we are losing the whole picture. This would be the idea. So in that sense, of course, it may be that for a company it's not so profitable, but the company, doing program of obsolescence is clear that it's not profitable for the society or for the environment. Okay? So in terms of intellectual property, exactly, I don't know if I understood the question. I'm not also very savvy on intellectual property, and also this is actually one of the most problematic aspects to deal in trade. But the issue also is that, in my opinion, now the intellectual property debate is changing because of all this AI and data situation, where big tech companies in the US, they are saying that they can use the data and they can use the information no matter what, and they don't care anymore about intellectual property. So intellectual property is an issue. Technology transfer has always been an issue for developing countries, because most of the technological progress is happening in developed countries, and it was protected by intellectual property. But as I'm saying, I have the feeling that now the debates are not exactly the same that we used to have. And in terms of policy recommendations, I would imagine that you are from Brazil. The main issue from what you were talking, the main policy is extended producer responsibility, which is basically that the producer has to take back the electronics, and this is what is happening, for example, here in Europe. And I don't know, I don't know the regulation in Brazil if you have extended producer responsibility or not. Then this is the question of enforcement, which is most of the problem in most of the regulation, to have the capacity to enforce them or not. There, I mean, probably there would be a need to improve capacity of the state to really make the firms take back the devices. So.
Thank you for your presentation, Professor. I am Supadet from Thailand. My question is, with regards to transitioning to environmental friendly digitalization, what do you think is the focal point that the global South countries should focus on? For example, like you mentioned e-waste, our discussant mentioned data center. And of course, lately there are a lot of initiatives by EU, for example, like the carbon border adjustment mechanism that is going to be in place soon. And with regards to trade, currently there's a lot of trade uncertainty with the hegemony like US and China, so we have to rely more on EU. But in order to satisfy the regulation that is imposed by EU, we have to do a lot of things. But in your case, since you're an expert also in UNCTAD, what do you think is the focal point that the countries in Global South should focus on? Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Nicolau. I'm from Spain. And for me, like when you talk about digital and sustainable, it comes really fast into a contradiction by itself. Like how can you like increase or like produce like very intensive, energy intensive production in the meanwhile of like being sustainable? And as you talk about the growth, I mean, maybe you don't like agree with the definition or whatever, and you say that you agree with some parts. I would like to know like which parts of the degrowth strategy you think that they could be applied, like in a very institutional framework like the UN, and if you can give like, yeah, maybe some comments on that. Thank you.
Okay, so you asked me for key core points. That is a very difficult way of asking or thing to ask, because the point is that, as you saw, I was talking about the need to look at the issues in an integrated manner. But it is important to keep this integrated perspective, but also, as you have seen, different countries are in different situations. So the priorities are going to change. So it means that every country has to really look at what is the situation and what would be the priorities first or not. For example, for a country that is exporting minerals, they would need to focus on this part, but also on trying to digitalize in an environmental manner when they increase their digitalization. For other countries, you need to focus more, you can focus more in this question of the circularity. In developed countries, there is a need to look more at the question of overconsumption in that sense. So I would say that for me it's very difficult to take key points, because it's really, there is a need to look at broad perspective and specific situations. So thank you. The other was a question of the growth, what can be, or what would be on that. I haven't gone very specific on the growth, and as I mentioned, the context where we have worked that allow us to link more to these issues of the growth or decoupling would be more the Sustainable Development Goal 12 on responsible production and consumption. That aligns quite well by reading properly. And for us, it's really to look that the growth would be more or moderation of consumption in developed countries, because we see that the digital divides are very important, and there are really situations of overconsumption in high-income countries, and also it can even be in high-income parts of developing countries. So this would be, for us, the point to stress more in that sense.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah. My question would be, you also highlighted already that profit is not the only thing that we should look at, so we should also, in my opinion, look at power. And when we look at digitalization and developing economies, especially in sub-Saharan countries, the digitalization mostly consists of smartphones and like phone infrastructure, but we don't, so something that will enhance the power of the big five of Facebook, Google, Amazon, and so on. But we don't have a full digitalization where the society could actually prosper from or improve the industrialization. So what is your view on like the big five as an actor for power in developed countries here?
Thank you, sorry. You mentioned a bit about the digital public infrastructure, and as I understood or I have read, it has to do more of a public service providing of software level kind of a thing, so having like a digital identity and digital public platforms. But it's the issue that I think one of you guys mentioned, that you are then depending on the computing power and basically on the cloud providing of the big tech, and that kind of again creates a new asymmetry. So my question is, are you guys in the UNCTAD thinking of the providing of the hardware part, so maybe data centers or computing powers? And yes, I'm curious about this because this is the topic of my master's thesis, so I'm really interested in your answer.
I forgot our names.
I'm Martina, and he's Luis.
Argentina and Germany. Gracias. I'm Spanish. Maybe. Well, I can, but I don't think I should. Okay, so on big tech in developing countries, I would like to clarify one thing. I didn't say that profit, we should forget about profit. We have to look at the benefits in all terms. You see what I mean? We need to have benefits for the environment, benefits for the society, and profits. So, and of course, technological feasibility. But big tech is the big issue, basically. In all the aspects, it is very related again to DPI, that your digital public infrastructure, and we are seeing the expansion. And the point, what we have been highlighting in UNCTAD is that in the traditional development analysis, we had this question of center periphery, that it was developing countries exporting commodities or raw materials, and then importing more value-added products. Now this has changed. Now we have the center is basically the United States and China, that they have the big tech companies, basically those two, and really even the European Union is periphery in the sense, in the technological terms. What is the difference in that context is that the European Union has more capacity to regulate, to defend from this big tech. And these big tech companies are, even in some cases, they self-regulate and they really establish the norms and we are all there. They are taking all our data and they are getting more and more powerful. And we used to talk about colonialism in terms of countries. It was also through companies, if we think about mining, but now the colonialism is big tech with individuals. I'm from a developed country in that kind of categorization, but I am an individual that I'm not probably so much because I don't use so much of social media, but we are colonialized through data. And this is giving them also, again, more and more power for artificial intelligence, and then they can go again to developing countries to get more data because also, as I mentioned, the governments are not so powerful to counter these trends. So the whole thing is a kind of a vicious circle. Okay? And on the digital public infrastructure, I'm working on it now, but my perspective is very critical. And for me, it's not even infrastructure. As you said, it's software, it's services. And I'm still halfway the research, but there are a number of the institutions implied there. They give or lead to some thinking that it is not so much in the interest of development, even if the narrative is very much like it is fantastic for development, but it is, so I have a number of questions there. I don't have many answers, but from the perspective of UNCTAD, I have to tell you that really we have been strongly highlighting the question of digital divide in terms of cloud infrastructure, in terms of connectivity, in terms of, and for me also one of the problems of DPI is that if the countries don't have the infrastructure, how can they go to the DPI? I mean, I have doubts about the utility of the DPI, or the way it is state, but first, I don't think many of the countries, which is very much expanding in Africa, have the conditions to have the DPI the way it has to be useful. So maybe we can discuss more or keep touch because, be in touch because it will be good. But really the hardware is key. And I have the suspicion that this DPI is going to lead to more data, to more needs of cloud that is in just a few hands. So this is the thing. National what? Sorry?
National provision of compute.
It may be, I mean, there are things, but the point is, the problem with all this cloud computing is that there is a need of a lot of resources, and it is basically these big tech companies who have. So in the end, I mean, there is the narrative there that it is public, whatever, but in the end, it is in private hands because the data are going to go to private hands. So even in the European Union, there is this Eurostack proposal, which is looking more at the physical infrastructure, but still the investment needed is huge. So. If there is, okay, because I want to do something before.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Thuy from Vietnam. So my perspective is that it's not only about the disparity between Global North and Global South, but also about a disparity between many countries in Global South. For example, my country, Vietnam, I think is more or less benefit more from this digital transformation than other countries because we don't rely on extracting materials and stuff, but we join in the global value chain by manufacturing and it actually create jobs and a lot of other things. Of course, we have environmental issues of those factories and also FDI related factories, but also my country is trying very really hard to boost digital transformation. So basically with an idea that digital transformation can actually help us to have like a leap to catch up and also other stuff. We also have problem with data because for digital transformation you need a good regulation for data. So I want to ask, like, in your opinion, for those countries that want to like pro digital transformation, do you think it is negative or positive?
Okay, very last. Yes.
I'm Sharmeen from Pakistan. I just have a quick one on, like, is there like a law for repair and to like stop planned obsolescence in the whole digitalization system? Thank you.
Obsolescence. If there is a regulation for obsolescence, programmed obsolescence, yeah, unplanned obsolescence.
Okay, on Vietnam, if I understood well, is that what do I think about countries that want to move in a structural transformation? No, totally. I mean, for me, or for us, structural transformation is the key for development, is really to move to activities of higher value addition, where the country can get the value, that there is more job opportunities, more economic activity. And actually, in the case of Vietnam, if we see what has happened with the United States moving policies away from China, for example, and this question of friendshoring, Vietnam has been one country benefiting from those policies, and it's very good to be able to move to more high value addition. What is important is also to look at this manufacturing to be sustainable from the environmental point of view. It is basically that. It's not going against, probably also the structural transformation can be for more clean manufacturing that at the same time allows to move to a more environmental sustainable economy and job creation or value addition. So structural transformation, again, the transformation, it depends how you transform and with which objectives. So, and related to planned obsolescence, as I mentioned, basically it's France and Quebec that really put rules on sorry, I said planned transformation is obsolescence. But I think the European Union was also moving further into kind of regulating. The problem is that with the geopolitical changes that our colleagues or your colleagues mentioned, that they are really going against some of the progress that was in this context about the moving to more sustainability. It is not so evident that this is going much further, because there were some moves, as I'm saying, towards circularity, towards the question of the digital passport, or the taking care of reparability and the obsolescence, but the situation is not so evident now. So. I would like to ask the colleagues that have presented or discussed, would you be interested in having the hard copy? No, but then, I'm sorry, but the criteria I found, because I only have one, it was too much for weight, I'm going to give it to the lady.
Thanks again, Pilar. Thanks.
Thank you. It was very good to talk to you.